Ever get that weird feeling when you're walking and you suddenly realize you haven't really been paying attention? Like your legs are just doing their thing and your mind is like off somewhere else thinking about, I don't know, the history of cheese or something.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa, wait, I'm walking. Like we just totally take movement for granted, you know?
It's true. Yeah, it's like this incredibly complex system working behind the scenes, muscles and energy and all this stuff every moment, but we rarely ever stop to think about it.
That is what we are diving into today, muscle and motility.
Yeah.
And you sent over some really cool stuff, biology texts and lecture notes, which is perfect. I kind of want to like get into the nitty-gritty of how movement actually works,
Yeah,
like down to the microscopic level.
absolutely. I think by the end of this, you'll not only understand the mechanics of how muscles work, but also like why movement is so important for survival, for
Yeah.
everything, every living thing on the planet.
Okay, I am ready. So the first thing that really caught my eye in the stuff you sent over was this idea that all organisms are modal. I always thought of movement as like walking, running, swimming, like big movements, but it's so much more than that.
It is. It's really about how organisms use energy to create motion, and it can be internal or external. So even organisms we think of as stationary, like plants, they exhibit motility.
Wait, so like a plant growing towards sunlight, that's considered movement.
Exactly. It's all about purpose. It's using energy to change its position for survival.
Okay.
And even within our own bodies, there's movement happening all the time. We're not even aware of it, like digestion.
Right, right. Our digestive system, it's like this highway
Exactly.
pushing food along. So that's
Yeah.
motility too.
Precisely. Peristalsis.
Yeah.
It's the wave-like muscle contractions that move food through our digestive tract.
Okay.
A perfect example. It really broadens the perspective of what movement actually means.
Okay, so we've got movement on like a grand scale, and we've got movement happening inside us without us even realizing it. But I'm curious about the tiny microscopic movements that make it all possible.
Yeah.
In the text, there was this thing called the sarcomere.
Yeah.
It's like the building block of muscle contraction.
Right.
And they described it as this tiny machine, smaller than a hair,
Yeah.
that generates force. How does something that small create enough power to move our bodies?
I know, it's incredible. The sarcomere is so efficient. Think about it. Every time you lift a weight, jump in the air, or even blink your eye, millions of these tiny sarcomeres are working, perfectly in sync to generate the force you need.
So they're like little tiny pistons firing away inside my muscles.
Exactly.
So what's going on inside this microscopic power plant?
Oh,
I think the text mentioned something about a sliding filament model.
yeah.
I need a refresher on that one.
Okay. So imagine like two ropes, they're interlocked, and you want to slide them past each other.
Okay.
That's basically what's happening inside a sarcomere. You have these filaments made of proteins called actin and myosin, and the myosin filaments have these little heads. They grab onto the actin filaments and pull them along.
So it's like a microscopic tug of war.
Yes.
But pulling those ropes requires energy, right? Where does that come from?
That's where ATP comes in.
Okay.
The cellular energy currency. Every pull by myosin head requires a little burst of energy from an ATP molecule.
So it's like feeding the engine, those tiny little engines to keep them running. So is it this constant cycle of grabbing, pulling, releasing,
Exactly.
fueled by these little energy packets?
And it's not just brute force. There's also a signaling system that controls when and how those myosin heads engage. Calcium ions play a key role. They act like a trigger that allows the myosin to bind to the actin.
Oh, okay.
Without calcium, the muscles stay relaxed.
So it's this perfectly choreographed dance of filaments and energy and signals.
It is.
But what happens when we need to relax our muscles? Surely we're not constantly flexing.
Well, muscle relaxation is just as important as contraction. And there's another fascinating protein involved, titin.
Okay.
It's actually the largest protein in our bodies, and it acts like a giant spring inside the sarcomere.
A spring. So when the muscle contracts, the titin stretches, and then when we relax, it snaps back to its original length, pulling the muscle fibers back with it.
Exactly. Think of it like a stretched rubber band. You release the tension, it snaps back to its resting state.
Right, right.
So titin helps the sarcomere return to its original length after contraction, allowing the muscle to relax.
That's a great analogy. But here's a question. If muscles can only pull, how do we create that back and forth motion? Like how do we bend and straighten our arm?
That's where the concept of antagonistic pairs comes in.
Okay.
Think about your bicep and tricep, the classic show me your muscles pose.
Right.
When you bend your arm, your bicep muscle contracts, pulling on your forearm. while your tricep relaxes and stretches.
Okay.
To straighten your arm, the roles reverse. Your tricep contracts, pulling your arm straight, while your bicep relaxes.
So it's like a perfectly coordinated dance.
Yeah.
One muscle pulls while the other stretches, and then they switch. That's so cool. No wonder we can move so fluidly. But how does our brain manage to control all these individual muscle fibers? Like, it just seems like an overwhelming task.
That's where motor units come in. A motor unit is a group of muscle fibers, all controlled by a single motor neuron.
Okay.
It's like having a team of tiny workers all following the instructions of a single manager.
Okay.
And your brain is like the CEO, sending signals to these managers, telling them when to activate their teams.
So it's not like our brain is micromanaging every single muscle fiber. It's more like delegating tasks to these motor units.
Exactly. And the amazing thing is that the size of these motor units can vary depending on the task. For fine motor movements, like writing or playing the piano, we use small motor units.
Oh, okay.
A single neuron might control only a handful of muscle fibers.
So that's how we get that precision.
Yeah. And then for powerful movements, like lifting heavy objects or sprinting, we use large motor units, where a single neuron can control hundreds or even thousands of muscle fibers.
Wow. So it's like having different sized teams for different jobs.
Yes.
That makes so much sense. So we've got these incredible microscopic engines working together in teams, all coordinated by our brains.
Yeah.
But how does this muscle power actually translate into moving our bodies through the world? I mean, muscles don't work in isolation, right?
No, they need a framework to act upon. That's where our skeletons come in.
Yeah.
They provide support and structure, and they act as levers, amplifying the force generated by our muscles.
So bones are more than just scaffolding.
They are. They're like the tools
Okay.
that allow our muscles to actually move us. And there's this incredible variety in skeletal structures
But-
across the animal kingdom. In your notes, you mentioned exoskeletons, skeletons on the outside of the body, like in insects and crabs.
Yeah, that's something I always found so bizarre. Like, imagine having your bones on the outside. What are like the pros and cons of that?
I know, it's wild. Well, exoskeletons offer incredible protection, like a suit of armor.
Right.
But imagine having to shed your entire skeleton every time you grow.
Oh my gosh.
It's a very vulnerable time for those animals.
Right.
They can also be heavy and limit flexibility.
That makes sense. We vertebrates, with our internal skeletons, we've got a little more flexibility.
Yeah.
But getting back to the lever analogy, how do our bones actually amplify muscle force?
Okay, so think about a simple seesaw. The fulcrum, the point where the seesaw pivots, is like a joint in our body.
Okay.
The effort you put in to push down on one side of the seesaw, it gets amplified on the other side, allowing you to lift a heavier weight.
Okay.
Bones act in a similar way, using leverage to increase the force generated by our muscles.
So our bones and muscles are working together like a complex system of levers, allowing us to move our limbs and generate force. But what about the points where our bones connect? It can't just be bone rubbing on bone, right?
It'd be so painful.
Yeah, that would not be good.
Luckily, we have synovial joints.
Okay, which are marvels of biological engineering,
Yeah.
designed for smooth, low-friction movement.
Okay, so I remember learning about cartilage in school, but I mostly remember it as like what makes our ears floppy.
Right.
What role does it play in our joints?
It's so much more than just floppy ears. It's a smooth, resilient tissue that covers the ends of the bones in a synovial joint,
Okay.
and it acts like a cushion, absorbing shock and preventing the bones from grinding against each other.
So it's like our body's natural shock absorber.
Yes.
Yeah.
But cartilage can't be the only thing
Right.
keeping those bones from rubbing together.
Right.
There's also synovial fluid.
Okay.
It acts like a lubricant,
Okay.
reducing friction, ensuring smooth movement.
So it's like our body's WD-40. But what keeps the joint stable? Like, how do we prevent our bones from just popping out of place?
That's where ligaments come in.
Okay.
They're tough, fibrous bands of tissue that connect bone to bone, holding the joint together and limiting its range of motion.
So they're like the ropes that keep a tent from collapsing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we've got a cartilage providing cushioning, synovial fluid reducing friction, and ligaments holding everything together.
Yes.
It's like a perfectly engineered system. But I'm curious about how we measure how far a joint can move. Like, what exactly is range of motion?
Range of motion, or ROM, is simply how far a joint can move in a particular direction.
Okay.
It's influenced by the shape of the bones, the elasticity of the ligaments, and even the surrounding muscles.
Yeah.
Think about doing yoga. You're basically testing. and improving your range of motion in different joints.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. So how do we actually measure range of motion?
Traditionally, we've used goniometers, which are like protractors that
Yeah.
measure the angle of the joint.
Okay.
But now there are these high-tech systems that use sensors and computer analysis
Oh.
to track joint movement in 3 dimensions.
So we can get like really detailed picture of how our joints are moving.
Exactly. And this information is crucial for athletes, physical therapists, anyone who wants to understand joint health and optimize performance.
That makes sense. Speaking of movement, I want to shift gears and talk about something we do constantly, without even thinking about it. Breathing.
Yeah.
How do muscles play a role in this essential function?
Breathing is a perfect example of muscles working in a coordinated way to create movement. It all starts with the intercostal muscles, which are located between your ribs.
Okay.
They're like the bellows that help your chest expand and contract, allowing you to inhale and exhale.
So the intercostal muscles are like the power behind each breath.
Exactly. And remember our friend Titan, the giant spring inside the sarcomere.
Uh-huh.
Well, it plays a role in breathing too.
Really? I thought Titan was all about muscle contraction and relaxation.
It is, but its spring-like properties also come in handy for exhalation. When you inhale, your rib cage expands, stretching those intercostal muscles
Okay.
and the titan within them. Then, when you exhale, the titan helps the rib cage spring back to its resting position,
Okay.
pushing the air out of your lungs.
It's amazing how one protein can be involved in so many different aspects of movement, from flexing our biceps to simply breathing. It really highlights how interconnected these systems are. But I'm curious, why is locomotion, the ability to get around, so important for survival? We've talked about all these basic movements, but how does being able to move from one place to another contribute to the big picture of life?
Locomotion is about so much more than getting from point A to point B. It's about survival, the perpetuation of a species.
Okay, so it's more than just convenience.
Yes. Think about the basic needs of any organism. Finding food, escaping predators, seeking out a mate, migrating to more favorable environments.
Right.
Locomotion is the key to all of those activities.
So when we see a cheetah sprinting across the savannah, it's not just about speed, it's about the cheetah's very survival.
Exactly. It's about obtaining the energy it needs to live another day. And for the gazelle that's being chased, it's about avoiding becoming that meal.
It really puts things in perspective. We often think of movement as just a way to get around, but it's so deeply ingrained in the fabric of life itself. It's fascinating.
Speaking of incredible adaptations for locomotion, I'm really intrigued by the marine mammals. Whales, dolphins, seals.
Yeah.
These creatures evolved from land mammals, but then they returned to the water after millions of years. What kind of crazy transformations did their bodies undergo to make that transition?
Their return to the water is a testament to evolution's ability to just create solutions to even the most challenging problems. Their bodies have become streamlined, like torpedoes, to minimize drag in the water.
So they traded in limbs for flippers and flukes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Their forelimbs evolved into flippers for steering.
Yeah.
Their tails became powerful flukes, propelling them through the water.
It's like they took the blueprint for a land mammal and totally redesigned it for life in the ocean.
Right.
And what about breathing? How did they manage to hold their breath for so long and dive to those crazy depths? Their respiratory systems are incredible. They have blowholes on top of their heads, which allows them to breathe at the surface without lifting their whole head out of the water. And their lungs are very efficient at extracting oxygen and storing it.
Wow, so it sounds like their bodies are just perfectly adapted for life in the water.
They are a perfect example of how evolution can shape organisms to thrive in even the most extreme environments.
I'm definitely feeling a sense of awe thinking about the power and ingenuity of these adaptations.
Yeah.
But I know we've only just scratched the surface of this huge topic. There's so much more to explore.
There is. We've laid the groundwork. Now it's time to dive deeper into the incredible diversity of movement strategies across different organisms. From the amoeba to the eagle, the world of motion is a symphony of adaptations waiting to be discovered.
Okay, I am ready for part 2. Stay tuned, everyone, because we're about to take our deep dive into muscle and motility to a whole new level. Welcome back, everyone. It's amazing to think we've only just scratched the surface of this huge world of motion. Last time, we journeyed from those microscopic sarcomeres to the powerful flukes of whales, but there's still so much more to uncover.
Yeah, it's true. We've kind of laid the groundwork, understanding the basic building blocks
Right.
of movement. But now it's time to delve into like the diversity of movement strategies across all these different organisms.
Okay, I am ready to have my mind blown again.
Yeah.
Where do we even begin?
Well, let's rewind the evolutionary clock
Yeah.
and start with the simplest forms of life. Single-celled organisms.
Yeah.
They may not have muscles and bones, but they've evolved these really clever ways to navigate their microscopic world.
I remember those amoebas from biology class, those blob-like creatures that just kind of oozed along.
Yeah.
How do they actually move without limbs or muscles? It just seemed like magic to me.
It's not magic, but it is pretty amazing. Amoebas use a type of movement called amoeboid motion.
Okay.
They extend parts of their cell membrane, forming these temporary projections called pseudopods,
Pseudopods.
which literally means false feet.
So it's like they're constantly reshaping their bodies to create these temporary feet and pull themselves along.
Exactly. And it's not just for locomotion. They also use these pseudopods to engulf food particles, drawing them into their bodies through a process called phagocytosis.
Wow, so it's like a multi-purpose movement strategy. I'm picturing them like little explorers reaching out, grabbing onto their surroundings.
It is. And they're not the only single-celled organisms with these clever movement strategies.
Right.
Some use cilia. Those are hair-like structures that beat in coordinated waves to propel the cell through liquid.
I've seen videos of those. They move so gracefully. It's like tiny rowboats with thousands of oars.
Yeah, exactly.
And then there are flagella, right? Aren't those kind of similar?
They are similar. Flagella are usually longer and fewer in number. They work more like propellers, whipping back and forth to generate thrust and propel the cell. Many bacteria use flagella to navigate their environment, moving toward nutrients or away from harmful substances.
Oh, that's cool. So it's fascinating how these tiny organisms have evolved all these effective and like diverse ways to get around.
Right.
But what about when we jump up the evolutionary ladder to multicellular organisms? How did their movement strategies become more complex?
Well, that's when things get really interesting. Because as organisms evolved and became more complex, they needed ways to coordinate the actions of multiple cells and
Right.
tissues to create movement. It's like going from a solo musician to a full orchestra.
Okay, so you need a conductor
Exactly.
to make sure all the instruments are playing in harmony.
Yes.
So what's a conductor in multicellular organisms?
It's the nervous system.
Okay.
Nerves act like communication lines, sending signals from the brain to the muscles, allowing for coordinated contraction and relaxation.
Okay.
So this network of communication allows for more complex and controlled movements.
So the nervous system is sending the signals. The muscles are the instruments. And together they're creating this symphony of motion.
Yes, I love that.
But I imagine that there are many different types of music being played, right? Depending on the organism and its environment.
Oh, absolutely. Just like there are different genres of music,
Yeah.
there are different types of movement, each adapted to the specific needs of the organism. And we see this incredible diversity in the animal kingdom, from the swimming of fish, the flying of birds, the slithering of snakes.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. The variety of movement styles is mind-boggling. But let's just focus on land animals for a moment.
Okay.
That transition from water to land must have been like a huge evolutionary hurdle
Right.
when it comes to movement.
It was a really big one. You mentioned this in your notes, the challenges of gravity. In water, buoyancy helps support the organism's weight. But on land, animals needed stronger skeletons and muscles
Right.
to support themselves and move against that force of gravity.
Right. It's much easier to float than it is to walk.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of friction. Water is relatively smooth
Oh.
and slippery, but on land, animals had to overcome the resistance of the ground.
So they needed new ways to push off and propel themselves forward.
They did, and this led to the evolution of limbs. First in amphibians and later in reptiles, birds, and mammals.
Okay.
And limbs provide a more efficient way to interact with the ground, allowing animals to walk, run, jump, climb.
So that one innovation, the development of limbs, opened up like a whole new world of movement possibilities.
It did, and those limbs continued to evolve and specialize, giving rise to the incredible diversity of land animals that we see today. Think about the powerful legs of a cheetah, the grasping hands of a primate, or the wings of a bird.
Yeah.
They're all variations on that basic limb structure.
Crazy how one basic adaptation can lead to so much diversity. But I'm curious about the creatures that don't have limbs, like snakes and worms. How did they get around?
Well, they've evolved their own unique and fascinating ways. Snakes, for example, use a variety of methods, including lateral undulation. They basically push their bodies against irregularities in the ground, creating that wave-like motion that propels them forward.
So they're using the environment itself to help them move.
Exactly. And some snakes, like boas and pythons, they can move in a straight line, using a method called rectilinear locomotion. They use their belly scales to grip the ground and pull themselves forward.
Oh, wow. So it's like they've turned their lack of limbs into an advantage.
Yeah.
What about worms? How do they move through the soil?
Worms use a method called peristalsis.
Okay.
It's actually similar to how our digestive system works. They create waves of muscle contractions that pass along their bodies,
Okay.
squeezing the soil, pushing themselves forward.
So they're just squeezing their way through the earth. That's incredible.
I know. And they also use these tiny bristles, called setae, to anchor themselves to the soil, prevent slipping.
It's amazing how these creatures have found such effective ways to move without limbs. It really shows that evolution can find a solution to like any problem.
Absolutely. There's no one right way to move. Every organism has its own solution, perfectly adapted to its environment, its lifestyle.
So we've journeyed from the microscopic world of single-celled organisms to these very diverse locomotion strategies of land animals. What other amazing feats of movement are out there waiting to be explored?
Well, we've covered a lot of the groundwork, but there's still more to uncover. Next time, we'll dive into the complex biomechanics of flying, walking, and running.
Okay.
We'll explore the intricate coordination, muscles, bones, and nerves that allow creatures to conquer the skies and all these different terrains.
I'm ready for liftoff. Stay tuned, everyone, for the final part of our deep dive into the fascinating world of motion. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the world of motion. We've covered so much ground already, from those microscopic amoebas to snakes just slithering through the soil. But I'm really excited about this part, because we're going to tackle some of the most awe-inspiring movements in the animal kingdom.
Wow.
Flying, walking, and running.
Yeah, those are the movements that just leave us breathless. Watching a flock of birds soaring effortlessly, or a cheetah sprinting across the savannah, they seem so effortless.
Right.
But there's these incredible feats of biomechanics and coordination happening.
Okay, so let's start with flight. It's mind-boggling to think about how creatures evolved the ability to defy gravity and take to the skies. What were the key steps, like evolutionarily, that made flight possible?
Well, it was a long process, involving a series of adaptations that optimized wings for both lift and propulsion, and feathers played a huge role, providing lightweight yet strong aerodynamic surfaces.
So feathers were kind of the game changer.
They were a huge part of it. And birds also developed hollow bones,
Okay.
which significantly reduced their weight.
Right.
And they evolved these powerful flight muscles anchored to a special breastbone called the keel.
So it's like they traded heavy bones for supercharged muscles and these aerodynamic feathers. Wow. It's amazing how evolution just finds a way to optimize for efficiency.
Yeah, it's incredible. And their respiratory systems evolved as well. Birds have these air sacs that allow for continuous flow of oxygen,
Oh, okay.
which gives them the energy they need for sustained flight.
So it's like their entire bodies are fine-tuned for flying.
They are.
What about the mechanics of flight itself? Like, how do they actually generate lift and stay airborne?
Well, the shape of their wings is really important.
Okay.
The curved upper surface, it forces the air to travel a longer distance, creating lower air pressure above the wing compared to below it. And this pressure difference generates lift, pushing the wing upwards.
So the shape of the wing is actually manipulating the airflow to create that lift.
Exactly. And they use their powerful flight muscles to flap their wings, generating thrust and propelling them forward.
Right.
And they use their tails for control, direction and altitude, acting like rudders and stabilizers.
So they're like master manipulators of the air.
They are.
It's incredible. It's amazing how they can just achieve that precision
Yeah.
and maneuverability.
Yeah.
But flight isn't just limited to birds, is it?
No.
What about bats and insects?
Yeah. Bats and insects have evolved their own unique adaptations for flight. Bats, for example, have these elongated finger bones that support their wing membranes,
Oh, wow.
giving them amazing agility.
So it's like their wings are basically modified hands.
Yes. Remarkable example of how evolution can repurpose existing structures for new functions.
Wow. That's so cool.
And insects have wings made of chitin,
Okay.
which is a tough but lightweight material.
Yeah.
And they flap their wings so rapidly, creating these tiny whirlwinds of air that generate lift.
It's mind-boggling to think about all the different ways that evolution has solved the problem of flight.
It really is.
It really highlights the power of natural selection to come up with solutions in the most unexpected places.
Yeah, it's a beautiful example of convergent evolution, where different groups of organisms arrive at similar solutions,
Right.
even if they're not closely related.
Okay, so let's shift gears now and talk about walking and running. I mean, these might seem more down to earth, literally,
Yeah.
but they're still incredibly complex. What are like the key biomechanical principles behind those types of locomotion?
They seem simple on the surface, but there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
Walking and running involve coordinating multiple limbs and muscles and joints,
Right.
all working together to maintain balance and generate forward momentum.
So what are like the fundamental steps involved in walking?
Well, it starts with shifting your body's center of gravity forward,
Okay.
and then one leg swings forward while the other leg pushes off the ground, creating momentum.
Okay.
The swinging leg lands, absorbing the impact,
Okay.
and then the cycle repeats.
So it's like a controlled fall, catching yourself with each step.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it.
And the faster you walk or run, the more force is needed to like propel your body forward and maintain your balance.
Exactly, and that's where those powerful leg muscles come in.
Right, right.
Working to generate the force needed to push off the ground, swing the legs forward.
Right.
Our feet are really important too. They act as shock absorbers, distributing the force of the impact,
Okay.
and they provide traction, preventing us from slipping.
It's amazing how every part of our body, from our brains to our toes, is working together just to make walking possible.
It really is amazing.
And just like with flight, there's such diversity
Yeah.
in walking and running styles.
Yeah.
Some animals, like horses, are built for speed and endurance.
Yeah.
Others, like elephants, are adapted for stability and power.
Right. And think about the different gaits.
Right.
Walking, trotting, galloping, each with its own pattern of limb movements.
Yeah, exactly. So the type of gait an animal uses depends on its speed, the terrain, its body structure.
Yeah.
Some animals have evolved very specialized gaits. Primates, for example, they've adapted for climbing and brachiation, swinging from branch to branch.
Yeah, it's really incredible.
There's so much variety in the ways that animals move through the world.
There is.
It's really inspiring.
It is. From the tiny steps of an ant to the powerful strides of an elephant, the world of motion is just this testament to the creativity of life. It's a constant reminder that there's no one right way to move.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the incredible world of muscle and motility. We've journeyed from the microscopic world of sarcomeres to the soaring flight of birds, from the amoeba's oozing crawl to the cheetah's lightning sprint. I don't know about you, but I feel like I've had a workout, but like for my brain.
I agree. It's been an amazing whirlwind tour of motion, exploring the mechanisms that allow life to move, adapt, thrive. And I hope this leaves you with a sense of awe and appreciation for the diversity and ingenuity of the natural world.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, we encourage you to take this newfound knowledge and apply it to your own lives. Pay attention to your movements throughout the day. Notice the muscles you're using, how your body interacts with the environment. And don't be afraid to move in new and unexpected ways. You might even discover your own movement style.
And as always, keep those curious minds moving. The world is full of fascinating questions waiting to be explored. So keep asking, keep learning, and keep diving deep.